Hello, everyone. We still have a few spots left in Kinetics Summer School here in Longmont, Colorado. It's happening from July 30th through August 8th. Kinetics is my method of mapping the whole human organism through partner fascia release. We'll be gathering for 10 days to learn kinetics and explore our capacity for healing and regeneration together. We'll also be taking a one-day adventure break to Rocky Mountain National Park, and I'm really looking forward to that. So for more information, you can go to kinetics.academy and click on Summer School or click the link in the description below. With that, please enjoy this episode.
Injury and pain live everywhere. And to risk being in relationship with anyone is to risk emotional pain as well. And so courage and willingness is to say, there are no safe spaces and there are no safe people. There are only brave spaces and brave people. This is our work as both clients and practitioners, is when we are practitioners, we are incredibly brave to come into someone's space because we can't keep them 100% safe. We as clients are incredibly brave to come into a practitioner space because we can't keep ourselves, nor can they keep us safe. That's the whole game.
Taylor, welcome to the podcast. I would love to know if you have an answer to the question, why are we suffering so much with our mental and emotional health?
Nothing like getting right to it, Elisha. Thanks for the meatball for a plate. First of all, thanks for having me. I always appreciate our conversations, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to share some things today that will be useful and satisfying for some other folks. I don't know that I have an answer, but I have a lot of thoughts and a lot of feelings about that question, so I'm happy to share some of that. My seat on the planet is someone who feels that beyond food and shelter, love and belonging is our most primitive need. I just was in Texas at the Cooper Clinic giving a talk to both their staff and their members on the longest study we have on the planet, the longest longitudinal study, which is done by Harvard University. And the results been published in a book called The Good Life. And it's been published by two of the psychiatrists who have kind of taken over the stewardship of it. And they have been following two groups of young men starting in 1940. Is that right? Around that time. And they've been following them, their spouses, children, grandchildren. And every year they ask them hundreds and hundreds of questions. They often fly out to find these people all over the world to meet with them and see them. They do blood work. They ask many, many, many things. And they have narrowed down one salient point that they think is the most relevant thing that makes a good life, and that is quality relationships. And I see that whether we take the political climate, the COVID climate, we take the culture of the story of our planet and what's happening on our planet, we take humans, what I see is we feel more alone and more fear of being alone, more judgment, therefore feeling more rejection. That relationship and intimacy are what help us navigate the difficulties of being human. And relationships have been the place we've been wounded. And so the place I see us suffer the most is when we have had rupture in relationship, when we have had a dysregulated nervous system and we don't have the skills to reattach to ourselves, to re-attenuate to ourselves, to repair rupture and re-enter relationships because we're social creatures, we suffer. And we can do that in all kinds of wacky ways. But I think that from my seat and where I spend most of my energy and time focusing with people, I would say that is where I see the most predominant suffering, is the sense of alienation, separation, not enoughness, otherwise known as shame, that has resulted in loneliness and people feeling fearful and therefore suffering in their bodies and their minds and hearts from all that.
I agree with that, having lived through a lot of that, as I'm sure we all have. Mm-hmm. Why are we suffering so much in our relationships? Like, where, like, I'm asking from the point of view of, if I imagine going back 150 years, 200 years, maybe not that long ago. I didn't live that, at that time, but I when I imagine it, I just don't imagine the same level of of rupture. I mean, obviously the world has changed so much and we've become a culture of individuals more than tribes or families or communities. Can you trace it to that, or is there something else that you have your pulse on with your over 30 years of experience working with people?
Yeah, well, I think, I'm always looking for the really sexy, like one and done bullet point answer. So I don't have that. But what I can say is, like, I was working with a person in the last month who her siblings were both sexually molested by a grandfather in the family. The grandfather had also molested her dad's sisters, her aunts. That grandfather had also been molested. I actually think there has been rupture and difficulty in relationship probably as long as there have been humans, because I think that we are so fearful in our nervous systems that knowing how to navigate them and how to navigate rupture and disruption is really the key. So there's so many things we talk about on the planet. Like, we could look at timing in the world of, like, when there were world wars. I'm going to imagine that the generation of people alive at that time had very different priorities than we might have 10 years ago. We might have 20 years from now. So I think one of which is the time in which you're on the planet and what's happening on the planet. The other is, I think, when we began, at least in America, from what I know, I wasn't here, but from what I hear and learn about and read about and know, is there was a lot more invitation to be part of community and a collective we. If I owned a farm 3 miles away from you, I'm still going to talk to you about what I'm planting because my seeds are going to blow down on your farm. And there is a way in which we knew that we had what I think of as, a therapist, facilitator, and coach is like what I call healthy interdependence. All independent, the capitalistic patriarchal model, I think is far too extreme. And I think we're wired to be in social connection and community and need each other on some point. And independence was a concept sold to us. I think complete dependence is another end of the patriarchal spectrum that is also sold to us of, like, people who are minority, people who are women, people that we've decided don't get to have the same rights. But there's this really lovely, healthy place in the center of that continuum that's quite gray that says, if we're going to be in relationship, we're going to need to be vulnerable. We're going to need to lean on each other. And we're also going to need to be able to hold and have ourselves. And I think culturally, we just haven't done a great job modeling and teaching people how to hold ourselves and how to in turn hold others, and to not let it bleed over or become either consumed with holding the other and abandoning self, or consumed with holding self and having no space or room for other.
Whew, there's a lot there that I'd love to unpack. So this is like a paradox I think about a lot, which is we all long to individuate, to self-actualize, to become something that only we know inside we long for. And we long for belonging. We long to be loved. We want to love others. We want to be connected. And so there are these two, I see a lot of tension between those things, because sometimes we have to actually push other people away, maybe parents, to assert ourselves as individuals. So from your perspective, where's that, like, if we could pull on those threads and kind of give people a glimpse of what it might look like to individuate in the context of community, of belonging.
Oh, I love that you asked me that question. It's like one of my favorite topics. So if you're listening to this at home, I want you to visualize a pendulum. And on one side is what I would call a remotely healthy family structure. Could be one or two parents, could be grandparents. There is some adult running the show on some level. And it's semi-functional. It's far from perfect. You might have an alcoholic in the family. You might have some abuse in the family, but you're getting your basic needs met and you're getting cared for in a very basic way, right? So it doesn't even have to be highly functional. In that, there is a fair amount of enmeshment and attachment that's healthy and functional for a child to actually learn to become their own person. Now, there is this stage, which is one of the final, most important stages of adulthood that you're naming, which is what we call individuation. And that is when the child says, thank you so much, mom and dad. I love you. You've done a great job. You've given me everything that you could. No hard feelings. We're going to stay in relationship, but you're fired. And they go all the way over to the other side of the pendulum. And we can think of this easily as seeing a teenager. The parents say, we're going to have Mexican for dinner. I don't like Mexican. We vote Democratic. I don't like Democrats. We've decided I don't want to do that. Right? And the child needs to push away. And the example I give that many of us can relate to in this is if I am an alcoholic and I work at the vodka bar and I drive a vodka shaped car and I'm married to the vodka bartender, I can't move next door and be sober. Initially, what I have to do is I have to push away, I have to step away, and I have to hang out only with sober people. I have to quit my job at the vodka bar. I have to probably separate or divorce myself from the vodka bartender. I have to stop driving the vodka car. However, the key part, and this is where repair and reconnection and relationships comes back to community, at some point, because I'm a social creature, the pendulum hope is that we fall to the bottom of the pendulum where I can hold me, I can be me, you can hold you and you can be you. We can have very different beliefs and experiences and feelings, and we want and choose to be in relationship with different opinions. So this child is in this remotely functional, healthy family. It pushes off to individuate, and it wants to come back to center to be able to say at some point, yes, mom, dad, grandma, aunt, uncle, thank you so much. And I know you don't like that, and I'm okay that you don't like it because I know we love each other anyway. Now, where it gets very tangly and sticky in my experience is one of two things. If the parental figures wouldn't let me individuate because maybe one of the parents died and they needed me to be the pseudo spouse, maybe they have anxiety needs and they couldn't tolerate me stepping away, that there was something that wouldn't let me individuate, I get stalled. The flip or the reverse of that is the parents that never were able to quite attach to me. And it feels so scary to individuate because they might just have up and left the country when I come back, and it's not safe to step away. So individuation is a hard enough process. That's if you're lucky enough to get to it. But some people never get the chance to get to it because of the sheer terror of what it would mean to try to leave and threaten this parent who needs them to stay, or feel threatened by this parent who didn't even notice if you left.
Okay, so can we drill down on this individuation thing and what it might look like, or give some examples of people who never really got to individuate or are maybe stuck in a certain phase? And I'm going to maybe call it like immaturity, but I actually think we're all immature, even though we're in adult suits, to certain degrees, or in certain areas of life, maybe that we're actually on a journey of maturing, and it never really ends. That's my personal view. So yeah, what is that? If there's going to be obviously maybe angst or anxiety or relationship problems, or these patterns are going to show up in someone's life. So what would some of the signs and symptoms of that be, do you think?
So I'm going to start in the reverse and give you a functional illustration and then go backwards.
Beautiful.
So I had an experience, my oldest son, who'll be 24 here in a few weeks. When he was 16 years old, he went to Spain for the year to study on exchange. We used to often talk on Sundays on FaceTime. And maybe 2 weeks or so before he was coming home from his year there, he FaceTimed me, and I barely picked up the call. And he said, "Mom, remind me how you feel about tattoos." I took a breath and I said, "Show me." And he pulled up his shirt and he showed me this. I didn't even know what it was, actually, which was concerning in and of itself. And he launched into this very long story of how the guy on the basketball team has owned a tattoo parlor for 2 weeks or something, and this is all fine. And he goes on and on. And then he says at the very end, after he gets all this hot air out, he says, Mom, I know you didn't want me to get this, but I know you love me and I know we're going to be okay. And I had this really fabulous feeling in my body that this first child, who I'm quite attached and slightly enmeshed to, not only could live in a foreign country with a foreign language and foreign currency and a foreign family, but could make this choice that was 100% against my wishes and share it with me and trust that I was going to be there to hold him, and that there was room for me to not like it, and there was room for him to like it, and for us to stay connected. And so I said, "Carter, we've done our job. We've individuated." He had no idea what I was talking about, but it was a great moment. So what I know from my own childhood experience and other people's experiences, when this child was applying to go abroad, I had a lot of friends who were like, how could you possibly let your child leave the country for a year and miss this time with him? And in my opinion, when I hear parents say that, I feel a bit of sadness, because what I feel is that's about them, that their child is looking to move forward in life and wants to create an opportunity for themselves. And the parent is fearful about how this opportunity will be, right? So some parents don't even let their child travel abroad. In addition, this child also on Christmas Day, he'd been there about 5 months, said to me, I need to tell you something. 2 weeks after I got here, I was held up at knife point at about 3 a.m, walking home from a party. And the reason I didn't tell you was because I was afraid you'd send me home. But what I did do was I told my host parents, we called the program contact, we made arrangements. He was smaller than me. He was drunk and he had a knife, not a gun, or I would have given him my wallet. And he walked me through all of his thinking. And what it gave me this chance to see was that to give him space, he was really capable of individuating, right? But the risk is that he might not be. But my job is to manage my fear around that. And if I can't manage my fear, then I'm going to try to control it, right? So parents who either can't hold themselves, again, maybe there was a trauma in the family, another child had died, a parent had died, we were financially bankrupt. There's many circumstances that create a sense of threat in the body. And when we feel threatened, we tend to control and lock down what we can. And so maybe we had a parent figure control or lock us down. In the simplest, most primitive way, at the very beginning of time, all of us were creating. We were making art, we were making music, and we had an adult figure come over and say, don't do it that way, don't use that color, more of this, less of this. And we felt that micromanagement where we wanted space. Now we flip that, we take that same scenario where the parent who doesn't care. I know a woman who is about my age, in her 50s. She did the exchange program I was just referring to that my son did back 30 something years ago. From Chicago, she went to India. And this would have been in like 1990, I think. I don't think I would have dreamt of sending my child to India even now. But she had parents who didn't know anything about it, didn't help her with the application, didn't pay anything for it, never spoke to her once the entire year she was gone. So now you have this other side of the pendulum of you have somebody who was like, oh, were you in India? We didn't even notice. Right. So that's a really threatening thing. On one hand, she's wanting to get away from these people who are not able to see her, but she's also craving being seen. Because now what we're in is this very messy toggle that I call the Chinese finger trap dance, is that a very primitive part of humanity is I'm desperate to be seen and nothing could terrify me more. So individuation is where it all starts and gets messy of there were times we wanted to be set free and our parents controlled us. There were times we wanted support and they were busy, distracted, passed out drunk. All of these, life things happened and we didn't have a frontal lobe to manage it. And so we internalized it. We made it about us. And so the threat of relationship starts early because our experience of relationship is you're in my space when I want space, and then you're not in my space when I want you here. And if any of you are listening are in relationship, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Any relationship at all. Yeah. Well, except maybe friendship, but there's room for that there too. So how did you become become a mother specifically, who could hold that kind of space? Because it's one thing to maybe learn about this in school or to read it in a book or to work with clients where you can be completely objective because there's no emotional attachment. So what was that, journey like for you to become that? Because, if you were just telling me about the concepts, that would be one thing, but you're talking about the proof, your children, and they are a living example of what you're able to cultivate. So I'm very curious.
Yeah. So I never wanted children and I never wanted to get married. And I was going to live on my own island. I was going to be some very famous person in France. That was always my story. I don't even know what that meant, but that was my story. But all of that was to say I had rupture in childhood with my family. And I thought the best way was what I learned in childhood is I didn't feel like I could go to people with my troubles. I would just go to myself. So my plan for adulthood was, I'm just going to go to myself. Why would I shackle myself to another person and their problems and then have kids with their problems? And then when I met my husband on our very first date, he's like, I don't know you, no pressure, but I just want to be clear. If you just want to date around, I'm not interested. I want to get married and have kids. And I was like, well, great. We don't need to go out on a second date because I don't. And here we are. We'll be married 25 years this August, which is humorous in many ways and fabulous and terrible and great. And what I began coming face to face to as we began to date, and he was giving me a different way to think about it and look at it, was what I was really afraid of was this very thing we're talking about, which is the risk I would be facing emotionally and being in deep, intimate relationship with a partner and children. And it shows up for me all the time. I just, this last August, brought my third biological son to college in Vancouver in British Columbia. And when you've been on a plane, you know the map that's on the little visual in front of you, and it starts to track like where you're leaving and it's heading you to. And I watched that damn plane the entire way just bawling. And I had my first realization of individuation in a different way, which was, oh, if these children choose to spend time with me and interact with me, I don't get to control it anymore. I don't get to say, Friday, we're going to your grandmother's. Thursday, we're doing this for Thanksgiving. They have to choose it. And so the vulnerability was what I didn't want in having children. And so what I learned early on was that I needed to create in my own body a container that could hold fear, a container that could hold uncertainty, a container that could hold the vulnerability of something happening, threatening, or taking away these humans that I loved. And that was the thing that I was avoiding by not wanting to get married and have children. And that is the skill that I have learned and practiced for 25 years.
How do you practice that?
1,000 ways. I go to the gym and I lift really heavy things that give me the confidence to know I can do hard things. I, have learned to, when I feel a feeling in my body, to pause and put my hands there and put my attention there and breathe into it and allow it and let it all belong. I practice witnessing other people's pain as a professional and just a human on the planet and being able to breathe into it and with them without fixing it or shutting it down. It's really been about expanding my window of tolerance, we might call it, or the trauma world often calls it, of that all these places I felt missed or aggressed against or not seen or misunderstood as a child live in my body. And so I'm slowly making reparations and loving gestures and messages and attenuations and learning to parent myself and tend to myself so that when these feelings come up, I can normalize that fear is a normal feeling. Separation and uncertainty are typical expected feelings, and they're not my preferred ones, but they do belong. And the more I can know them intimately and the more I can tend to them, the more I can hold the space for them.
Oh my God, I love this so much. Not all psychotherapists that I listen to speak like this, and that's okay. And I don't want to make it about them, but I, as someone who works with people in physical pain, typically, which is impossible to separate from emotions, in my opinion. I mean, we can. I talk about something called untangling for anyone familiar with my work. If I just left it at it's impossible to separate, they might be like, but Elisha, you always say we can untangle. So I talk about putting things in their rightful place, because physical pain in the body belongs in the body, not the soul. And the soul pain, the emotional pain, the relational pain belongs there, not in the body. So that's what I mean by untangling. But it's difficult to be injured or in chronic pain, especially without having emotions about it. So I've also had a front row seat to it, and I don't know if you've experienced this, and I don't think we've ever talked about this, so this will be fun. I'm constantly dancing a line between people coming to me because they want to be out of pain, and I imagine the same is true with you. They're experiencing pain of some kind in their life, relational pain, emotional pain, maybe chronic pain. I don't know if you get those people. And they want to be different. They want the pain gone. They want something to change. But I have noticed that if I'm attached to them changing, or I try to fix them in any way, it doesn't work. It doesn't go anywhere. It's like that's not it. That's not the formula. So it's this paradox again. Here we have another paradox. So I have come to experience in my own life and also working with so many people that we can't change something we're unwilling to accept. And that sounds like such a paradox, and people have such a hard time with this. So there are a couple of places I want to go, and I'll try to track them because I definitely want to go down this track. Like, how do we do that? And what is that about? And what does that mean for the people seeking help from professionals? And then what does that mean for professionals? Because I have both people in my audience. But what I'm also tracking here is the nervous system regulation that I believe you're speaking to it a little differently than is commonly out there, which is like, there's this misconception, wildly popular misconception that a regulated nervous system is always calm. And I don't know how that happened. I don't know how we got here. But what you're talking about is capacity, is the ability to ride the waves of anything that comes without being knocked so completely sideways that you can't be present for life. So would you speak to that first, and then maybe we can come back to this other thread?
So those things thread together for me, which is our culture is a capitalistic culture. So it's built on selling us products and things we need. And most of that is how to get out of discomfort, right? Like $9.99 a month and you can be on this dating app. I don't know the dating app that says this is the app you can buy $9.99 a month to deal with how it feels to not be having the dates you want or finding the life partner. I don't know about that, right? The $9.99 a month app for how you're going to get a six-pack abs. I don't know of the app that says this is the app you spend $9.99 a month to actually get in relationship and feel good about the body you have right now as it is, right? So first of all, everything's predicated on other. Somewhere out there, someday, some way, with some product, with some age, with some hair color, with some partner, then you'll feel better. So there's this future promising society that says right now actually isn't enough and you shouldn't be content. So I think that's part of the cultural stuff we're all cooking in of how could I be content? There's a war going on. There's six-pack abs I could have. There's 10,000 things I could list. And so we've created a wanting, seeking culture. And whenever I'm in wanting or seeking, I'm usually unhappy because what it's saying is wherever I am, however I am is not right, is not enough. There's something else or better. So I think that's a variable. I think the other piece that I hear you speaking to is there's nothing sexy about saying to people, you're suffering, you're in pain, and what I'm going to do is help you deal with that better.
Or accept it even, right? It's like...
Yeah, help you make friends with it. Help you know it's part of the experience. It's not bad. It's not wrong. It might even be, you know, your superpower or a place where you get more in your life than you got anything else from. But my understanding of humanity is we're driven to be pleasure seeking or what we think will bring us pleasure, and pain or discomfort avoiders or what we think will bring us pain or discomfort. And so it's why everybody listening at home, raise your hand if you've run a yellow light. Raise your hand if you drank your coffee or tea when it's too hot. Raise your hand if you spoke before you thought. Raise your hand if you slept with the wrong person. Raise your hand if you knew better and did it anyway. That is what human behavior is about. We are actually not cognitive robots from Amazon. We are human beings that are emotionally wired. And so I think the place I try to give us compassion, and I always term this sort of neurologic compassion, is the brain gets so tired figuring out and working with all these things, it wants the fastest way to relax. And the fastest way is to try to seek pleasure and let go of it. If you make it through the yellow light, you have this little dopamine hit of like, heck yeah, I made it through that light. I'm getting where I'm going. If you get a ticket or gosh forbid you hit somebody and kill them, the shame is exponential. So we live in these extremes rather than, to your point, the dualities and paradoxes that are just not sexy. Our culture is very largely predicated on black and white extremes. It is or it isn't. It's that or it's not. And it's all that and. And is a really powerful word. We use but a lot. And if we could start interchanging but instead use and, we would change a lot of how we see and feel about our days.
Hmm. So I still am tracking this other thing that I want to come back to, but I know a great many people personally in my life and online, people I've worked with or people in my audience that they've maybe bought other courses, they've tried, quote, tried everything, they're trying all the things to, quote, regulate their nervous system or get out of the freeze response or get out of chronic stress, and it's not working. Can we just talk about that a little bit? And then I have a specific personal experience with this that doesn't work for everybody, that maybe I'll bring in because I think it's really interesting about the nervous system. But first, I'd love to hear, just like if we had to start somewhere, if it's like, if there's no formula that's going to work for everybody, that's for sure. But if there was like a practice or a place to start for somebody who's like, I just don't know what to do anymore.
Yeah, I think we always start where our feet are. One of the things I say to everybody that I work with is like, we do a lot on finding your feet, like getting your feet on the ground, on the earth, like feel your feet under you. That's where life is happening. It's not happening up in your head. It's actually happening right where your feet are. And to start getting mindfulness feels really important. So I was trained as a very traditional hatha yoga teacher. And over the years, like pretty much everything I've been trained around, I've evolved because I've outgrown what that has to offer. So one of the things I will often do in a weekly class I teach is there'll be a point, and then you never know when it's going to happen. And I don't know either. I will get everybody to start running around, like run around really fast and get your knees up and jumping jacks and do a crazy dance and high five your neighbors and get their heart rate really up for maybe like 2 or 3 minutes. And then I'll have them come back and stand on their mat and put their hands on their anchors, on their belly and their chest. And I'll say, now just breathe. Don't try to calm yourself down. Don't try to do anything. Just notice that you're right here and you're okay. Even in this moment where your heart's racing, you're a little sweaty, you're a little bit thrown off, it was unexpected, you're a little dysregulated, you're okay. But this wiring of pleasure seeking and pain avoidance, I think the second we feel uncomfortable, we have a fight, flight, or freeze response. And so step one is to begin to recognize that we have that and to begin to develop this call and response system with our body that it's like, oh, you're okay in there. I hear you. I hear you, heart all revved up. I feel you sweat all dripping down my neck. I feel you heat, and I'm right here. We're going to do this together. And again, you look at the culture who largely where I live in the yoga world is people go to restorative yoga and yin yoga. And it's like, it's not terribly difficult to calm the nervous system with dark lighting and eye shades and heavy weighted blankets. And that's great. I don't have any problem with that. But my experience is more people struggle when they get dysregulated, aggravated, anxious. Someone cuts them off in traffic. They go from 0 to 60 because they don't know how to allow discomfort, fear into their system. So I think step one is recognizing there's nothing wrong with discomfort or fear. We're wired for them. They're normal, and we can learn how to meet them to actually work with and for us rather than against us.
So something we could maybe pull out of this for people, and I do this in ways that are personal to me, and I think it might be personal for people, is maybe there are practices people can do that gives them a little bit of stress or a little bit of fear, like exposure therapy, I guess. But like you were talking about, just running around unexpectedly. Now, you can't trigger that in yourself because if you're doing it yourself, then you know what you're doing. But you can jump in a cold, icy river, even if it's literally just 10 seconds, not to force yourself to stay there, but just to see what happens and then be with yourself in the experience and notice, wow, I wasn't as afraid as I thought I was. Or, oh my God, that was absolutely terrifying and I hated it and I never want to do it again. Okay. But like whatever happens to be with it and to notice. And so what I'm curious about is, because I think this is something that a lot of people have a hard time with, that I'm talking to in my life or working with, knowing that, how do we know the difference between maybe a patterned reaction that is sort of automatic. It's like there might be a trigger underneath, but it's like so far below the reaction that we're not aware of what even the trigger is. You mentioned someone cutting you off in traffic. And if you have this natural reaction of like heart pounding, you ass, like wanting to yell, well, there might be something under there that's worth paying attention to. Like, how do we know the difference maybe between something that indicates a trigger or a trauma or some unprocessed thing that we might need to get to the bottom of versus just kind of like there is the everyday, like I have a saying, life is your curriculum. So maybe there's no difference here in what I'm getting at, but I guess what I'm trying to get at is like the pattern things we repeat versus life presenting us opportunities to be with, just be with something that is. So maybe external triggers versus internal patterns.
Yeah. And to your point, I think we're still in the paradoxical lane of both and neither and either. So I think this is why, to me, mindfulness is a huge component of everything I offer, because if I don't know myself and I'm not paying attention, I'm not aware, I'm out. Mm-hmm. I will be forever on the fish hook in my lip, hooked onto patterns and reactivity and story and drama, because I am totally unaware and I'm going through life in default. I took a Peloton class this morning, which I cannot stand, but I promised my trainer I would do some cardio. And this instructor today, about 10 minutes in, said, and if you just want to check out on this ride, go for it. And I just almost fell off the bike. Like, are you kidding me? And so I think I get encouraged overtly like that and indirectly to check out, to numb out, to shut down. And for me, my work is the opposite. Almost every person I meet with individually or when I meet with groups, we do something called a SEW check-in, SEW. What are 3 somatic sensations happening unarguably in your body right now? What are 3 emotions and what's a want? I give people a sheet that I have laminated that they dry erase circle. It's like, what do I want or need? There's 40 things on it. Mm-hmm. Getting more aware is a personal responsibility that is not a luxury. When I know myself, I get to take personal responsibility of how I show up for me and therefore every single human I interact with in the day. But if I am not aware, if I am not in responsibility, if I am not paying attention to me, I get hijacked, I get overthrown, I overtake other people, I do all this stuff and it's all a blind spot. And I get to just throw up my hands like, this is life. What can I tell you? I'm just an anxious person, because I'm not taking responsibility for growing awareness. And I think that is the single number one most important reason everyone should have a mindfulness practice, whatever that looks like for them.
Whew, there's a lot of good stuff in there. And I'm still tracking this other thread. Yeah. And here again, we're in the paradox, right? Because you could argue that we actually have a responsibility to ourselves to know ourselves. Because like, how can we even care for ourselves if we don't know our own needs, and wants? But you also said, and I think this is so important, it could easily get overlooked, that actually we have a responsibility to all the people in our life to know ourselves.
100%. And I think those are the most important things that humans can grow skill around, is connecting to oneself and connecting to other humans is why we're here. It's something we do almost every day. And when we don't do it, we and others suffer. And when we do it, we and others thrive.
Yeah. So some of the consequences I'm imagining, just because I've lived them, I don't have to imagine, if I don't know my needs in relationship, well, then I'm just going to be in reaction to somebody's actions that I don't like, or I'm going to make stories up about how they treat me and, maybe think that they're just dismissing me and they don't care about me, but actually that's not true. Probably most 99.9% of the time, the stories we make up about other people are not true. So yeah, if I want to take care of my body, I actually need to know my body's needs to a degree, Obviously we can become obsessive about these things, which is again, pendulum swinging to the other side. But How did you come to this because you work with so many people with relationship ruptures that it's like, I'm just curious where that came from for you, that there's responsibility we have not only to ourselves, but to the people in our lives to get to know who we are as human beings, what our emotional and relational needs are, because we have needs that are our own, but if we're in relationship with people, they impact those people. We have needs for space, and you might need more space than I do, or vice versa. And we need to be able to communicate that. How did this grow out of your practice working with people? Or
I think most things that I now speak to with great passion come from two places. One, my own survival. I think the first 2 or 3 decades of my life were largely built on living in my head, surviving concepts. If I could somehow like put enough information in here, I could figure it out and beat the system and somehow survive this matrix of life. It's a terrible 2 or 3 decades. And so as I began to unravel my own nervous system and meet myself, I'm a very curious person. And I'm also, I don't know if lazy is quite the right word. I don't love that word. What I might say is I like this. I am Veruca Salt in Willy Wonka. I want it now, Daddy. I want the golden goose. Like, I'm very impatient. And so I'm like, what's the fastest way I'm going to feel better?
Oh, well, we share that in common. That's for sure. Yeah.
And so I want to give that to other people. And so people have been very generous when I'll say, I started a leadership training 5 years ago, and I said to everybody in all the advertisements, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm making this up. And people generously were like, great, we'll do it anyway. And I was like, okay. So I let people know, like, we're experimenting in this together. And people are usually so amazingly generous and willing. And I think, like, I usually, though, will always say, I've tried this first. I teach everything from physiologic size to vagus nerve massage to tapping to all kinds of emotional, physical ways of being in the world. And there's nothing that I'm offering that I haven't tried and experienced and experimented with first. So I feel like you don't really have street cred in the game if you're just sharing more knowledge in your head, right? But wisdom is knowledge that to me is dropped in the body. And so everything that I've come to awareness around has been my own realization of like, oh man, you know what's really missing? Oh man, you know what's happening in my marriage? Oh geez, you know what's happening here with my kids? And so because I have a bittersweet capacity to be really introspective, it's brought me through very dark and very beautiful territory.
All right, let's go to the other track. And I think this is going to parallel. So the other track is we might be, potential clients of somebody out there, or we're looking for solutions. We're looking for answers. We have pain of some kind or discomfort. And I know, I'm pretty sure you would agree with me that there's nothing wrong with looking for solutions and answers, right? It's part of the human experience. Like, it's natural to want to ease suffering and feel better if we don't feel good. And there's this paradox we were talking about with the need to accept something before we can change it. So I'd love to meander through both sides of things, like being the client of somebody looking, for help, or maybe even if they're not a client, like looking online, looking at YouTube videos, looking, but also from the practitioner side. I teach my methodology, kinetics, to practitioners. And this is one of the hardest things for me to teach. It's like innate to me. And this ties in with what you were just saying, which is that you've lived it first. So I definitely have a belief that we can't speak about something with conviction unless we lived it. And the only other option to be able to speak with conviction is to own that we don't know. That we're exploring, experimenting. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what's going to happen. And then you can have conviction because you genuinely don't know. But we can also speak from personal experience, and there's conviction in that. And I had the lived experience of being the patient or client of many professionals who all did their very, 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 very best to fix me. And that is what I wanted, but it was not what I needed. And so I didn't get what I needed until I stopped asking people who I was paying. So, Taylor, I don't think you know this about me, and I don't want to make this too much about me, but some of my audience knows the story. But I had knee pain that prevented me from running for 8 years and hiking for 6. And when I moved to Boulder, I still couldn't hike or run. At that point, it had been 8 years since I could trail run. And I moved into a mountain house with, at the time, my best friend, Jess, and a couple other people. And we lived up Linden Lane, you probably are familiar, in Pine Brook Hills, with a trail right outside the door that went to the top of Mount Sanitas. Now it's called Lion's Lair, but it didn't exist back then. So it was kind of a goat trail. And I was like, there is no way I'm going to live here and not hike and run again. And I had been learning this methodology, or really, I guess, a modality of stepping on people that I discovered in 2008. And I asked the founder of it to help me run again, and he gave up. And I asked some of the other teachers in the community. I think I asked about a dozen people in this community, like, help me, run again. I believe that this thing is going to help me. And they all did their very best. And I still couldn't run. I still had this knee pain, and I couldn't hike. And then I moved into this mountain house, and I turned to Jess one day and I said, Jess, will you learn to step on me and help me run and hike again? And she said, sure, that sounds fun. And it was. And we spent 2 weeks of me teaching her how to step on me. And this is a very abbreviated version of the story. But 2 weeks later, I was hiking and running again. And that experience that summer has been the wellspring of my entire private practice, because what I know happened, and I talk about this so much, but I could talk about it, is she wasn't trying to take my pain away. She could care less if it worked or didn't work, and she was not attached to me running again. She was just in it with me. And then asking, well, what if we tried this? And she loved me. And it wasn't, I didn't have to pay her. And that dynamic taught me everything I needed to know about how to work with people in pain. It's like, I'm going to do what Jess did for me. I'm just going to ask what if, and I'm going to be with people, and we'll see what's going to happen. So I guess I share that because I think I don't like to criticize other people, and I don't want to criticize people, but I do have criticisms of the way that we've structured practitionership and certain professions that are kind of designed on this model of people are coming to you with their problems and your job is to help fix them. And also this line that's not supposed to be crossed of professional and, client and practitioner. And I've discovered that I get the best results when I act like a genuine friend to my clients and let them know verbally and in every way I possibly can that I actually care. So I'd love for you to speak about this. And I know you recently gave up your license. That's right? Yeah.
I still have a license just because I haven't canceled it. But I have changed over my psychotherapy practice to coaching for all the reasons you're naming. Mm-hmm. And what I have learned, very similar to you, is that putting myself in the space, putting myself in the room as a human being and sharing my experience has been one of the most transformational experiences for other people. I had a ex-psychotherapy client who was then in my leadership training program for a year call me this morning. He asked his girlfriend to marry him yesterday. She said yes. And he said, I need you to know that you sharing yourself and you showing up the way you did is what gave me hope around love. He had been married earlier in his life and was like, I'm never getting married again. And it was so wonderful to hear this. And it was really reaffirming of what the realm of psychotherapy struggles to acknowledge, in my opinion, but other realms that we're creating need to have a space in the container that all relationships, professional or personal, are relationships. Mm-hmm. And no one's a healer and someone else is the being healed. No one is fixing and someone's the fixee. I like to say to my leadership students, we're all just janitors, just trying to do our best to clean up these messes and go forward with as little drama mess as possible. And I don't care what someone's education or financial status or marital status or family of origin story or any of those things, that we are all wanting peace. We are all wanting ease. We are all wanting less suffering. We are all wanting to go forward in life as beautifully as possible. And I don't have any information that's going to fix or save anybody, because it's our own job to save ourselves. And I don't know that any of us need fixing. I think, again, our culture is built on a self-improvement model, which implies there's something inherently flawed with you. And that's the base of 95% of the suffering I see in coaching and leadership, on retreat, in self-compassion class, is that suffering is I'm not enough. And as soon as I feel something wrong physically or emotionally, that's just confirmation of my not enoughness. So I got to either get the heck away from it or beat it back or medicate it or fix it or something. And what you're speaking about that your friend offered you just, first of all, moves me so much. I love that she was so willing, because I'm like, oh my God, I don't know if I could have been as courageous as she was. Good for her. And I'm so glad it was helpful. And I think the second part for me that comes up in my body is, I'll often say to clients in the first time we work together, my job is to work myself out of a job. All I'm going to share with you in whatever capacity we work with is what's worked for me. And your job is to try it on, no different than if you're going to REI to get a coat. And if it fits, fantastic. If it doesn't, throw it away. But what I ultimately want to arm you with is this powerful truth that you never need to let what you can't do get in the way of what you can do. And so had I stepped on you for 2 weeks and you weren't able to hike up Lion's Lair, I'd be like, okay, let's go do something else. Let's come up with a new thing you can do. And maybe this will get solved. Maybe it won't. But those are the people who really love us into wellness, and we can love ourselves into wellness, and we don't make it wrong or broken or bad. As Tara Brach, one of my meditation teachers, likes to say, it all belongs. And when we let it all belong and there's room for it, it may resolve itself, it may not, but I'm going to become bulletproof and unstoppable, because whatever the situation is, I'm going to be able to show up for it in my best and most beautiful self. And that's what I think all of us want.
Yeah, I'm convinced that what we all want, or at least, like, I don't want to speak for people, for everybody, but certainly what I want and wanted back then, and still want today, because I'd like to go to certain types of practitioners, and I've tried and had really bad experiences. And what I believe all my clients are really longing for is, like, I truly believe what we all actually want is for psychotherapists to not even have a job, no offense, but like, none of these people.
100%. That's all I've been saying in my transition to coaching is, when I realized that 90% of my clients in the last 30 years just had human experiences. It's like the leadership training I created is not about CEO leadership, though we have CEOs. It is called the art and practice of being fully human.
Yeah, and we want that in our life. Like, we want that with the people in our life. Like, we don't actually, nobody wants to pay someone to be their friend or to care about them, or, but we don't have that in certain parts of our life, and there's so much pain around it, and we build up scar tissue around it, physically and mentally and emotionally, and then we think we're broken, or there's something wrong with us, and then we go try to fix ourselves. And yeah, it's just this vicious cycle that I see people go through. So I don't feel done yet with this paradox of just being with something with curiosity, and from the client side and the practitioner side. Like, what are some nuggets we could maybe give people listening who, let's maybe talk to the practitioners for a moment. And if anybody's listening, I think it'd be such a beautiful thing if you are a client or a want to be client, a potential client of somebody, if you would also share if, yes, this is indeed what I'm looking for, because I think that would be really helpful for the practitioners. But on the practitioner side, how can we cultivate, or how can we dance that line of someone's coming to me for help, They have expectations of getting help. They're giving me money. That could feel like a lot of pressure. Maybe not, but but I imagine it could. And if you know this, that we can't create the change they're longing for until I first accept them as they are. And then ideally that they accept where they are and who they are right now. And I know, it's going to look different in your office maybe than mine because I'm working with bodies and more viscerally and tangibly, but actually it's still a human being in there. Like that's the whole point. So how do we, if you were to speak to practitioners right now, like what does the journey look like to be that kind of practitioner in your?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question and a gift that I hope we can give to any practitioners listening. As someone who's been a practitioner for 30 years, working with bodies as a movement teacher and mindfulness and leadership and psychotherapy and lots of really nice interaction, and then being a client myself of many, many practitioners, I would say the first thing I want you to do is take yourself off the cross. We live in this world where our expectations of self are so high, and many of us thought our value and worth was what we did. So those of us who are in quote unquote helping professions, we want to know ourselves enough to know, am I already in this because I need to be of value in every given moment. I need to be healing people. I need to be fixing people. Like some of us have that. So I think first, just take yourself off this cross that you're somebody bigger, better, separate, other than the rest of us, and that you don't need to be and you're not. And the great news is we're all just janitors. And with that said, can you feel a confidence and a competence that comes in being fully human and sharing with your patients and your clients that you're not there to save them. You're not there to fix them, but you are there to be an awesome co-pilot, that you are there to develop great relationship. You are there to be a house of mirrors, which sometimes is hideous and sometimes is beautiful and sometimes is scary, but you are going to co-pilot. I like to think of it as in my best moments, I am midwifing people through whatever they're going through. I can't push that baby back up in the uterus. I can't get it out. I can't take away the pain, but I am going to be right there, right with you. You're going to feel me by your side. That's what you've hired me for, to draw up your own intuition, your own wisdom, to take a little bit of what I've offered, try it on so that you can work with whatever it is. And I think the other question that would be a great one for all of us as practitioners to ask the folks we work with in the first session is, and what would it mean if this thing you've come to me for never were to change?
Mm-hmm. I love asking that question. And it's like, there's a lot of emotion most of the time for people.
And for us as practitioners as well, because to your point, I know when I am going to my chiropractor, my trainer, my personal practitioner, I am looking for something, right? And for them to say, so what if you came here, Taylor, and the thing you came here for never changed? Part of me would be like, I want my money back. What are you talking about, right? And the other part of me knows enough now in my 50s to say, yep, that might very well be it. And I'm sure I'm going to get something from this. Who knows what it'll be? But I think, again, trusting that you as a practitioner have a care, have value in your human experience, and have wisdom and skill in just showing up, and that showing up in genuine relationship, where again, going back to the beginning of our conversation today, where you can hold yourself and hold that person without getting sticky or needy on them, without pulling back when they're making requests, where you can really hold this beautiful space. That's one of the most healing spaces we can create. And that's enough. So I want to say, like, all practitioners should have little tattoos on the inside of our wrists, like, I'm enough, that's enough, because our shame of enoughness can come up so much because we want to help people be relieved with their suffering. We want to be of value. We want to be of service. And we often don't trust that showing up as we are with what we have in this moment is enough.
I don't know that this will be a challenge to what you just said, but I think there's something here that's a little different than that worth looking at, which is, so I have a belief that if I'm afraid of my own pain, I'm going to be afraid of yours. So if I'm a practitioner working with people in pain, maybe I even entered this field because I'm so terrified of my own pain, I just want to wave a magic wand and get rid of it all over the earth. But if I haven't looked at my own, if I haven't held, my own pain with reverence and curiosity, how could I do that for someone else? And so it's not necessarily not enoughness, but it's like maybe there's not capacity that's been built, or maybe my own personal work is preventing me, having not done that personal work is maybe preventing me from being that co-pilot that this person needs me to be. What are your thoughts on that?
I totally agree. And where I think we're in alignment there is I actually think when we avoid our own pain or suffering, when we avoid any part of ourselves, there is a shame that there's something wrong or broken or defective, or we're not capable, or we're not going to change. And so I still think it probably connects back to shame, but I think what you're saying is true. And I think of Adyashanti when asked, what's the first step someone could take towards spiritual awakening? And I almost fell over. And he said, avoid nothing. And I think it's a wonderful thing to think about as practitioners of, to your point, we're so curious of how we can cure the world. And in fact, when I was a very young 20-something as a first psychotherapist, I absolutely was like, I'm going to save and heal the world. And then 6 months in, it was like, I got slapped by a wet fish so many times to realize girl, you got some stuff to look at here. And that was the path I was on or needed to take. And there was the point where the bypass of self to go to others, spiritual bypass in general is avoidance. And avoidance is usually shame. There's something wrong, flawed, or broken with this thing, so I got to get away from it. Rather than if all the parts belong, then I can bring my inadequate parts and my insecure parts and my uncertainty parts and my unknown parts. And I'm willing to play with it, to sit with it, to be with it, and then share it with you. Mm-hmm. But I think that shame often drives the practitioner to know it all and have it all figured out and know their pain and fix people. And there's a whole lot of story around a lot of it, because our sense is if I just came as I was, flawed and incomplete in some ways, I'm enough.
Mm. So let's talk about the client side of things. So we're a client, maybe, or a potential client. We want help, maybe for our body, for our soul, relationship pain, maybe. And, it's a very vulnerable thing to hand over your pain to someone. And I would argue that, speaking of personal responsibility again, that we do have some responsibility, it's not all on us, to know what kind of practitioner we like working with in terms of what to look out for in a first session maybe, or to, if we're talking about looking at websites, maybe just a feeling. So, but then there's this paradox I want to bring in too, we have this thing that's painful and we want to change it. And here you and I are, and we're practitioners in adjacent but related fields. And we're telling people you can't change what you are unwilling to accept. And I know for every single person that I've ever said that to, it's there's there's an immediate pushback. And it's people feel like they're surrendering and giving up. So I'm tracking two things here maybe to have you speak to or just talk about. What should people be looking out for? How would they know that they've found a good practitioner? Because and the reason I'm asking this is because a lot of people who come to me have a complaint, and they're bringing past pain of prior practitioners where they spent a year with somebody hoping for change that never came, and they didn't have any other experience besides attempting to create change that didn't come, and now they're out thousands of dollars, and so they're skittish about spending even more money, maybe rightfully so, perhaps. But yeah, what and I'm asking this question on two counts. One, you're a human being who's had a lot of pain, and you seek out practitioners and you ask for help. I've heard you say that and seen you do it. So let's speak to that first, and then come back to this paradox of accepting whatever it is that's going on.
And can you ask me another question of what would you like me to speak about in terms of my own pain as a client and seeking out a practitioner?
Well, maybe come back to this mindset thing and knowing ourselves. Like, what is the healthy mindset someone could have or adopt or cultivate when they have something they don't know how to solve on their own and they're looking for help?
I would say 2 hiking poles, curiosity, and the other is courage and willingness. I think that we need to know ourselves. I'm back to the personal responsibility and self-awareness. I think mindfulness is so key because the more aware I am, the more I have a felt sense, a cognitive sense, a whole body sense of what's happening for me emotionally or physically, right? Because some people come into me and they're like, I'm having panic attacks about XYZ. And then within 2 appointments, it's become clear, oh, there's a whole nother reason they're having panic attacks. And it was a blind spot, right? Yeah. So I think that personal responsibility is also like one of the things I just adore about my trainer is the very first time I met him 3 years ago, when I walked in the door, he was like, tell me how your body feels. And based on, I've come in 3 years with migraines, with back problems, with heavy bleeding from periods, with insomnia, with so many different things. And based on that, he's like, great. So that tells me we're going to work this way today or that way, right? So I and my body are informing how he's treating me. Mm-hmm. The other thing that happens in those appointments is as we're going forward working out, he'll say to me, do we need to go up and wait? I've worked with so many trainers who just hand things to me, tell me what to do. They don't check in, nor do they ask me to check in. And so with my trainer, and why I go back to him 3 times a week, is he has all the responsibility in my seat and he's got my back. We literally just started doing back squatting and he's right behind me there spotting me. And I know he's got me. I know he's paying attention. He's listening. He's aware. And he's going to do everything he can to support me. As I mentioned before we got started in this call today, I dislodged a rib last week and he cannot be there every moment. He can't keep me perfectly safe because the challenge for all of us, and if we're clients, we need to remember this, is relationships are risky. You might spend a lot of money. You might spend a lot of time. When I dropped a bar with 100 pounds on it and it popped my rib, like that happens. There is a risk in living and breathing and getting off your couch and getting more courageous and willing to know that that's part of the jam. You know, someone's like, are you mad you got injured at the gym? And I was like, no, I could get injured. And I hate to tell you, my injuries are never glamorous. Like I can think years ago, I was covered head to toe with gashes and people are like, were you mountain biking? Did you jump off a cliff? And I was like, I tripped on a stump walking on a flat surface, right? Like injury and pain live everywhere. And to risk being in relationship with anyone is to risk emotional pain as well. And so courage and willingness is to say, there are no safe spaces and there are no safe people. There are only brave spaces and brave people.
Hallelujah.
And this is our work as both clients and practitioners, is when we are practitioners, we are incredibly brave to come into someone's space because we can't keep them 100% safe. Mm-hmm. We as clients are incredibly brave to come into a practitioner space because we can't keep ourselves, nor can they keep us safe. That's the whole game.
Oh, God. I can't tell you how nice it is to hear you say all that. So I've been an unlicensed by choice practitioner since 2011. And I'm now teaching other people this methodology, kinetics, and I don't offer certification and I don't offer licensure, I don't, I wouldn't license them anyway, but it's not a licensable profession anyway. It's not recognized by anything. I don't want it to be, because I don't want it to be regulated and I don't want to be told what I can and can't do. But the number one kind of theme of questions I get asked is, well, how do I know it's safe if you don't tell me what to do?
And we can't always be safe. Well, people
No.
retreat with me, and the first night, people are like, I'm not sharing because I don't know these people and I don't know if they're safe. I'm like, oh, let me spare you. Okay, raise your hand if you've run a yellow light. Raise your hand. And I'm like, you see all these liars, cheats, and thieves? They're not safe. And I still want you to be courageous and willing, because the other option is to wait for things to be safe and you're 97 if you're lucky and you're dead and you've missed the whole thing.
Okay.
Because there is no safety. Now, with that said, I'm not looking for practitioners that have 17 allegations against them of sexual misconduct, right? I'm not going to go say you play in traffic or like, let's use our logical, rational, best adult minds. And let's also stop coming from this wounded child place that says, I can't be remotely uncomfortable. I can't be threatened. I can't get out of my comfort zone. I can't do anything that might hurt me. I see people at the gym all the time who are like, how have you progressed so much in 3 years? I'm like, MF risk. Like I'm trying things and sometimes I get injured and sometimes I don't, but I have steadily gotten more competent and more confident and more strong because I'm risking. But if I was like, oh, I don't want to do that because it might hurt this. Oh, that might be too heavy. Oh, and I could do this about anything in life, right? Like, oh, I don't want to have that conversation with that person because it could go poorly. Oh, I don't want to try to use my knee that way because it might do that thing. And we cook this into the world, right? I think of being trained in hatha yoga and things people used to say like, don't let your right knee track over your right foot because you'll injure yourself. And now I'll ask teachers, why? Yeah. Well, I don't know. That's just how we learn because you don't want to get injured. Well, how would you get injured? Because I move my knee 1,000 times in different ways a day and I'm not injured, right? So part of it is even professionals that have certifications and credentials and licenses and all the things, they're still parroting what they were taught and they don't even know why. So the bottom line is, I don't care how certified or not someone is, all human experiences and human relationships are risky.
Yep. 100% agree. I went through a period in my practice where it was like peeling off layers of just indoctrination, I guess, because I was told never, ever, 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 ever touch this part of the body. And then I was like, it's 10 years later and I'm only just now asking, but why? Yeah, it's amazing how, and then I started working, I started stepping on joints and going into places you're never, ever, ever supposed to do anything. And clients get amazing results from it. And there's amazing potential in that area. But yeah, we need to be mindful and take conscious risks. And, there's a difference between being stupid, I guess, or, being, foolish.
So here's how I like to differentiate this. If I say to you, Elisha, when we hang up from this podcast, it's icy outside. Be careful. What I've done is I've taken you out of your body. I put you in your head with vigilance and fear. That is the last place I'd want to put someone on ice. Yeah. Now, if I said to you, hey, Elisha, when you go outside after this podcast, be mindful there's ice. I've actually put you in your body. I've put you in awareness. That's where I want to put people. So we don't even have to use the word careful, which implies fear, vigilance, and problem. But I find to say to people, let's be mindful, which is turn on your awareness, get in your body, and develop a relationship where you can start to really trust those and know that trust of anyone, ourselves, others of the planet, is about 83%. And I don't love that stat because my preferred experience would be that everything was 100% trustworthy. And my actual felt experience is 83% is incredibly high. And that's going to have to be good enough.
Love it. Okay. I want to talk about something else related to safety. So I imagine, as you've already spoken to in this podcast, you've worked with a lot of people who've been through violations, severe traumas, sexual traumas, maybe physical violence, maybe wars. I don't know. And so, the world is a dangerous place, actually. And I've lived through that. And I maybe just because of who I am, because I think we tend to attract people who are similar to us. And maybe I'm just further along and I can help kind of guide. And as you do, I share my story so people know I've been there. And I'm not perfect and I'm still working on other things, but maybe the thing they're going through, I did get to the other side of. There's a lot of talk in the world around creating safe spaces and being trauma informed. And I put it in quotations just because I don't even know what that means when it's a platitude. But as somebody myself who's been through pretty severe sexual trauma and psychological manipulation in my childhood, I have only healed by accepting that the world is a dangerous place and it's not going to stop me from living fully. And I'm going to take meaningful risks in relationships, which is the place where I was wounded, and maybe with my body, where I experienced injury as a child, and those things kind of got enmeshed then. And it's by exposing myself, you could say, maybe to dangers, because relationship is potentially dangerous, right? Emotionally, like we're risking our heart, we're risking maybe having a similar experience. And I'll wrap this up in a moment and then turn it back to you. But, like I end up working with quite a few people, mostly women, who have experienced sexual traumas. And they're kind of obsessed with creating safety, a safe body, a safe world, safe relationships. They've shrunk their world to create safety. But now their world is literally their body, and they're in chronic pain, and because they're living in chronic fear. But logically, they're safe because they no longer go out by themselves, or they've reduced the potential for something dangerous to happen, but then they're living with this chronic fear, anxiety. So I'm curious, from your 30 years working with people, like, are there helpful places of movement where we can, move people through that experience of getting out? Like, I would consider that a freeze response. It's functional freeze, but they're frozen in a small space and they don't want to move out of it because it feels risky. Would you say that tracks?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so I would say, and I might have said this at the beginning of our time together, is that I think some of the three key elements that when our system is humming and moving efficiently as the social creatures we're wired to be, we know how to re-regulate, we know how to repair, and we know how to re-enter relationship. And most of us get stalled somewhere in there. We're in relationship, but we're frozen in fight, flight, or freeze, and we're not regulated. Or we're regulated, but we don't want to be in relationship like you're naming, and we don't know how to do repair, right? And so we got hurt. The people we're talking about were hurt by humans. So you cannot heal in your head. You heal in community. You cannot heal a relationship trauma on your own. But that's, of course, logically what makes sense, and why people do it is like, why would I go back to the stove that burned me? The problem is that humans are wired for social connection. All the data we have on the planet supports that. We have more data than we know what to do with around that. But what we don't have are a lot of skills, like how do I work with the nervous system that I've got when it's dysregulated, as we were talking about before, like it's all amped up and I'm anxious in front of this person. Like one of the simplest things I teach people to do is communicate from behind the scenes, is what we call it in my office in coaching, which is I have to have a hard conversation with you. I have to say to you, Elisha, I never want to be on this podcast with you again, right? What I would start with is our leadership students learn, lead yourself in greatness first. So first, notice if I'm holding my breath and I'm clenching my fist and I'm calcified around this ball in my stomach and I am all wound up about having this conversation with you, who I'm being when I come into conversation with you is a wrecking ball. No matter what I say, it's not going to land well because my nervous system is a wreck, right? The second part is, if I can regulate myself, how can I leave you in greatness, which is to share behind the scenes. Elisha, you matter so much to me. And what's most important to me is at the end of this, we're connected. This is so scary for me. I've been thinking about it for 3 weeks. I ran it by my best friend. I've been rehearsing what to say because I wanted to get it right and not hurt your feelings. Now, you're afraid I'm going to tell you the most awful thing. And by the time I tell you whatever it is, you're like, that's all? Because you've been given an invitation into my humanity. But because we don't have skill around repair and relationship, we tend to lob bombs over the fence and run. Or we give word salad that's 10,000 words that doesn't say what we really mean and want. And we keep protecting and armoring ourselves up to not expose ourselves. But the real practice, as you named, is, I'm a dog person. I'm a Labrador person. I've had labs my whole life. I love them so much. And the two things they do that I just find to be something I wish I had more capacity around is when they come into contact with something or someone that just kind of bugs them, they shake. and they just move their body and they're like, man, I don't want to be holding on to whatever that was. I need to make a story up. I'm just going to move it right out. Right. I mean, 1,000 times a day, we should probably be doing that. The second thing they do is they roll over on their back and they get humble. They don't know if someone's going to kick them, and I'm sure some of them have been kicked, but they're like, hey, I'm letting you know I am humble and available. And I actually think that's what we do. And I think those practices help us to change the thing that I think you were naming sort of around the scenes, which is those of us who have been traumatized perceive the world as dangerous. But what we do not often think about is what a dangerous world we have created inside ourselves. We don't know how to meet ourselves. We don't know how to talk kindly to ourselves. We are living in a relationship that's based on disgust and repugnance of self. And if we don't move the needle on that, there's no chance we're going to move the needle with other people, because we are sure, and we have written a solid story, that we and humans are just despicable. We're not fit for human consumption, and we're out.
Yeah. So one of the things that just comes up repeatedly with my clients, and I imagine with yours, is boundary violations showing up currently for people that maybe look different than they did initially, but people are terrified to set boundaries and then maintain them. Like, you know, not a wussy, weak boundary that's really just like a, no, I'm going to roll over, right? But like an actual no.
So I am like super unpopular in this topic. I'm the only ex-therapist and coach I know that says I don't believe in boundaries, and I want to tell you why. Number one, if I need to set a boundary, I usually already have a problem. Because the people who we work in simpatico and in a respectful way, I never have to think about setting a boundary almost ever, because there's actually like an understood spoken or unspoken respect and a way of holding ourselves and each other that's already working. But if I am already thinking I need to erect a boundary with someone, it's already because they don't want to listen to it. So then what I find is people take a lot of energy and a lot of resource, and they erect this boundary that has a lot of form and rigidity. And then they walk across the top with a gorilla machine gun, which is very scary. I'm imagining heavy, and they police it. And guess what? It'll be of no surprise. The person on the other side has no interest in being policed, and they have found pinholes through the boundary wall you have created, and they are breaking your boundary. And people are furious that they're breaking the boundary, and they reinforce it harder. But here's what I would say. What if you interchange the word boundary for your truth? So for example, Elisha, if you said to me, Taylor, I would like to call you every day, 5 times a day and talk. I could set a boundary and say, Elisha, I will take your call once a day. It's going to be at 8 a.m. It can't be for more than 20 minutes. I'm not going to do it on Saturday. And I'm going to put all this stuff into trying to manage you, because my nervous system is saying, wait, she wants more than I want to give her. Great. Start with you. Know you. Leave yourself in your greatest place. Actually, Elisha, says the person who takes a big physiological sigh, I really appreciate that request. I feel the bid for my attention and you moving towards me. And for me, what I'd really feel great about is we just talk when we talk. And if I'm available and willing, I will absolutely pick up your call. And if I'm not, then you won't hear from me. But if I'm truthful in that, you might not like it. It might be disruptive. It's vulnerable because I'm taking personal ownership, versus a boundary is often like, you're doing this thing and I want you to do, and I'm going to try to manage you. I find that totally tiresome and a waste of time. But I do find that when I'm courageous and vulnerable, I just speak my truth.
Okay. I'm I'm curious here to see if we're saying the same thing and using different words. And this is an example of, we all use words and then we assume we know what someone means, but maybe we don't, and then we don't ask. And then we think we're actually having the same conversation, but we're really having 2 different conversations. So this actually feels kind of fun for me right now. I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. So we have this word boundary, and there's a lot of conversations in the world around boundaries, and I used the words boundary rupture. So I'll just use me as an example. Having been through sexual traumas, I then found in my early years, I then found myself in my 20s sleeping with men I didn't want to sleep with because I didn't know how to say no. So how I might word it differently, if I were to use a different word than boundary, is learning to protect myself. because sometimes we do actually need protection. As we said, the world is a dangerous place. Bad things happen. There are people who have bad intentions. So I wouldn't want to just tell that person my truth. Right. My truth is in this, I don't know. I'm curious how you would
play it through. So let's play it through, right? Because the first thing you're telling me, I think it's really powerful, is there's an emotional charge, which is I need to protect myself. Mm-hmm. So I think when I'm coming from a fearful place, I don't disagree that we need protection, but if I'm coming from that fearful place, I'm probably a bit thrown off. I'm not in my body. I'm in my head. I'm in my amygdala. I'm in fear response, and I'm trying to manage that person. That might be how I would see a boundary, right? So, but if I have a hard time saying no, it's not so much, that's part of why we use a boundary, is I don't want to have to say no. If I don't know how to say no and say, I'll make this up. Joe, thanks so much for this lovely date. I've been a victim of sexual assault, and I actually don't ever give anyone my home phone number. I don't ever invite someone to my house. I don't invite people out. Like, that would be my way of, I don't see that as a boundary. I see that as my truth, right? Or like today, I don't feel comfortable having you come over, because sometimes too, a boundary can get so rigid, and then we're actually like responsible for enforcing it. Like we make it as though you can never do this, because that's more of a fear or protective response. But like, if I'm in a call and response relationship with my own body or another human being, I get to say, oh, you want to come over to my house, or you want to ask me out again, or you want whatever, hold on. Yeah, that doesn't work for me. And I don't have to give any reason, or I could give a reason, but my truth could be anything from, that doesn't work for me. Thank you so much. I'm not interested. That doesn't sound good tonight. I actually never want to do that. But it requires us to hold ourselves, to know ourselves, and to hold the responsibility. Now, the problem is, just like boundaries, truths can be broken. Me setting a boundary is an illusion if I think I'm controlling what Joe's going to do. Because if Joe is a serial rapist or a nut job, Joe is going to find his way into my phone, into my home, into my body. And it doesn't matter if I set a boundary or said truth or anything else, because Joe's going to do what he wants to do. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, the whole world is not full of Joes. Only small amounts of people are Joes. But I find that to me, a boundary leaves me more disempowered, because a boundary is literally a line. It is a separation. It is this sense that like, I don't know how to be separate and manage the energy or the human being that you are coming in my space. And I don't want us to manage others. I want us to actually only manage ourselves. So we're kind of on the same page and kind of separate. Both.
Well, I guess what I would say is I agree with you and do what you're speaking about now, but there's no way in hell I was capable of that back then. So the only thing I was capable of back then was to allow someone to violate me, a boundary, a physical boundary, and then summon the courage to make sure they knew I never want to see you again on some level. And that was, and maybe you could say that was my truth. And in retrospect, yeah, like if I fully knew myself and was regulated and had the capacity to say that kind of thing, God, of course, I would rather be that person that, and so there's this I think, and I'm just speaking for myself, but like that phase of healing for me was the most shameful, because I wanted to be that person, because I would read about it in books, or I would maybe hear someone talk about it on a podcast like this, and I did not feel capable of it. So do you work with people who are maybe saying that? I don't know. I don't hear.
Yeah. I think that's totally true. And I wouldn't say though, like once someone's violated you, like what boundary are you setting? Like how far they'll violate you, right? Like I don't even hear what you're saying as a boundary. I hear what you're saying is, I don't actually know myself. I don't know how to hold myself. I don't have this capacity and window of tolerance to advocate for self. So it kind of all feels like a crapshoot. Maybe sometimes you could stay them up, and sometimes you couldn't, and sometimes you apologize, and sometimes you ran. And like, I think that's survival mode. And I think any of us who have been through trauma of any kind, we spend a lot of our lifetime in survival mode because we haven't run into enough of the right people, circumstances, resources to help us start to move into thriving. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I think that what we want to do is give ourselves compassion of, yes, do we all want to be operating from the highest, most evolved, simplest, most direct and successful ways of being? I think so. But do we? No. It's like, how often do we put something in our mouth we know is not serving our body? Like in the simplest ways, we're not operating at full awareness and intentionality at every moment. I think it's a great aim, but I don't think there's nothing definitive that says we need to live there. And I think the times that we come from great distress, self-compassion is our best friend of, I don't care if it's a boundary or truth saying or anything else. It's the compassion of, I've been really wounded and I'm clawing my way through and out, trying to find a place where I'm just not going to be wounded anymore. And then eventually I'm going to start repairing and healing, and then back again into that repair into relationship.
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, it's funny. I use the word boundary, but it's not, I don't even think I've read a single book about them. But I do imagine to some degree a boundary around me. And it's just like I own my space and nobody gets to come in without my permission, you know?
And I guess in my experience, we're back to safety, which is that's exactly my belief. And I can't tell you how many times someone's touched my face, touched my ass, touched my shoulder, done all kinds of things to me as a human being and as a female that I have not been wanting or willing or asking for. And I've had 500 neon signs that says, don't come near me. And it still happened.
Yeah.
You know, when I had a police officer say to me, would you like a ticket or give me a blowjob? Like, what are you supposed to do when you're in a dark country road in South Carolina at 1 a.m. and you get asked that? Like, I can have all the boundaries I want. Should I tell that police officer, excuse me, Officer Jones, my boundary is that you don't touch my body? Like, it's all a farce to me. And truth is the same. Have a boundary, have truth, but also we're back to the safety issue, which is the hard thing is, as adults, we can do much more to keep ourselves safe than as children. And to your point, based on our history of trauma, if we're in surviving or thriving, our skill level, the person, what state we're in when it happens, any of us are prey to be a victim of certain things at times. And we can have all the truth and boundaries we want, but I don't want that to be an illusion that we are somehow 100% able to keep ourselves safe.
No, I completely 100% agree. It's more like I trust myself now, I didn't then, to say no when I want to say no, say yes when I want to say yes.
Perfect. So that to me is we're on the exact same page. That is truth telling, which is I get to say yes or no. I'm not even trying to manage you, but I'm going to be yes or no. You're going to do what you're going to do. Hopefully you're not crazy serial killer. Hopefully you're like a sane person and you're going to respect and appreciate, be curious about that. But at the end of the day, I don't have any control over that. And that's why boundary to me just feels so edgy and it feels more fearful to me. Like I have a lot to hold up and manage. Whereas my truth is I'm going to be in my truth. And I don't have any control over if you're going to like it or respect it, but I am going to hold it and know it and express it.
So I think what you're actually getting at here is that to use, I think the words you used at the beginning, in a semi-functional relationship, a semi-healthy, it's like there's stuff there, but, overall needs are getting met. There's kindness, there's love. It's a negotiation, which is different. Or a collaboration. We negotiate sometimes, we collaborate, we individuate, but then we work together, versus this is me and my needs, and this is what works and doesn't, and you just tell me what you need and what doesn't work for you, and then we'll just live that way.
Welcome to why it's so damn messy to be in a relationship. And it's why I'll hear couples come in and one of them will say, well, what I need you to do is, and I'm like, time out. You can want whatever you want, but if you're putting your needs on somebody else, we're already in trouble because they may not do it. And I don't want you to go without if they're not going to do it. I definitely want you to ask for everything you want and you can share. This is a need I have. But as soon as I hear someone say like, you need to da 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 da, I hear the boundary, the control, that I'm going to manage you. And I just find that to be both unsatisfying and ineffective. And to your point, we are constantly dancing in relationship and I said earlier, in the Buddhist precept, we say to our parents, if we're lucky in our 20s, thank you so much, you're fired, I'm going to take over. But we're smart and we go hire partners. Oh, this person will complete me. This person will be the person my mother couldn't be, my grandfather couldn't be, whoever it is. And we forget because we have this childlike part of us that it's tiring and hard to adult. And so we very much want someone else to come in and do the adulting. I certainly do. And if anyone on this podcast is interested, I'll give you my number later, right? It's really hard and really tiring. And so being in a relationship is a tremendous amount of work. And I find it to be so rich and so multidimensional and so informative. I could never have learned about myself the things I know without being in relationship with my husband, my children, humans. And it's also incredibly unnerving and frightening and threatening and disruptive, and back to the same place we keep looping through, which is that's part of the experience of being human. Relationships hurt, bodies hurt, emotions hurt, and that's how we're wired.
Yeah. Okay, so I haven't lost this track, and that was wonderful. Thank you for diving into the muck with me a little bit on that. So let's come back to this acceptance piece, because I think, and then maybe we'll close after that. So I'm in pain. I want to change. I'm coming to you, Taylor. Help me change. What is that process of acceptance, accepting exactly where I am? Like, how do you work with that with people?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. So I think it was Tara Brach who said, any physical or emotional pain in the body is resistance. And I get curious about that. So often when people come in and they start to describe their suffering or pain, which is usually why they've come to see me for whatever it is, professional or personal, I'll ask them to take me into their body to the experience of it. So what I mean by that is someone says to me, I'm here because my boss is a real jerk and I can't quit because of this and right? Something that is sort of a little white bread, I might say. Or someone might come and say, I've had horrible trauma and I want to be in a relationship and I keep sabotaging every relationship. What we'll start by is just talking a little bit about the relationship or experience that they're in, the problem, the suffering, the person. And I will ask them to take me in, I'll ask them to identify a couple sensations in their body that they feel when they're talking about the suffering, right? Sometimes people will say I feel this tightness in my chest, or I feel this knot in my stomach. Okay. So then I'm going to ask them to find the one that's calling their attention the most. I'll ask them to take their physical hands and put that on that part of their body. And I'll ask them to start to send their breath and their attention into that part of their body. And then I'll ask them things like, does this sensation have a color? Does it have a shape? Does it have a size? Does it have a weight? How does it want to be sat with? Does it want to sit all the way across the room with its back to you with the door between you? Is it willing to come in your lap and wants to have its back rubbed? Does it want no part of you? How is it willing to be breathed with? And then ultimately, as we get closer and closer to the sensation, I'll ask them, does this sensation have anything to share with you? There's huge wisdom that pours out of people at this point. And the other question I usually bookend that with that gives me just as much information is, and what do you want to share or communicate in response to this sensation? And in this experience, there's nothing we're trying to change. There's nothing we're trying to fix. There's nothing we're trying to make any different. We're actually just trying to practice being in relationship with the sensation, with the information, with the experience, with the messaging, with our bodies, trying to get out of the head, because the body, in my experience, is always in present moment. It has no agenda to be socially liked or tell me something I want to hear, whereas my head is very motivated to give me what I think I want, to tell me what I think I want to hear. So ultimately, what I want people to do is to go towards their suffering, because the biggest thing people do when they come to me is want to get rid of it. And the first thing I find that we have success around is to go towards it. And that can take a while because a lot of people don't have interoception. They don't have an experience of being in their body. We're building up tolerance to that. But largely what I want people to do is to be able to go towards a feeling, to meet it, to know it, to palpate it, to tend to it, because that is how I see us doing life. And that is the place where when people are suffering, we start. And I find that just not resisting the suffering, breathing with the suffering starts to lessen some of the suffering and allows us to see more clearly what the suffering is and how it wants to be sat with, tended to, met, whatever it is. And that's the evolution for me of being a therapist and a yoga teacher and a mindfulness instructor. It's all the things I've learned that have come together that feel the most impactful for my own experience and that I see most impactful for clients.
Yeah. I mean, being someone who works with bodies, I would wholeheartedly agree. The body doesn't lie. The body is in the present moment. The body is the living, breathing, feeling part of us. There is no life without a body. So the thing that I maybe just want to reflect that I really loved about what you just described is the part where you were giving people options of what the sensations or the feelings want. Like the visuals that you gave of like, does it want to be across the room with a door in between, or to and I think because I have worked with some somatic psychotherapists before that try to do similar things, and my experience sometimes has been I'll go hunting for something just to satisfy them. I mean, I don't do that anymore, but I did. Now I know, well, that's fawning and that's a people pleasing mechanism. And I don't, but it's a performative, I got to give them an answer. They're asking me a question. But I think the visuals and like, what does it want is a really helpful tool. So thanks for that.
Great. Yeah.
Really useful. And what might we say, and I can chime in if you want, but I'm curious what you would say to someone who just can't accept where they're at. Like, I don't know how. I don't know, Taylor. I just can't, like, I want it to change. Like, why, I
might say, can you accept that? But you don't want it to change. I know, which is maddening, right? It's maddening. It's maddening, but it's what's so. And I find, I try to remind people that if anyone could win the war against reality, it should be me, because I've waged so many, but I've yet to see anyone wage a war against reality and win. And yet I know that there are times when it's just almost impossible in our minds or our bodies or our hearts to allow something to be so. And sometimes we need to defy it. I think of going to my grandmother's wake and seeing her in a casket, and my eyes allowed me to see her chest rise and fall like she was breathing so that I could tolerate that experience. And I think somebody could have said, but she's dead, but she's dead, but she's dead. And she was dead. But like, I, at 12 years old, wasn't able, willing, ready to see that. And that's okay. Like, it's okay that you're not willing to accept where you are, but that's going to be a place that needs love too, because there's a lot of aggression there and fear and reactivity, and that's going to need some love too. And if we could all usher ourselves home, midwife each other home, I think the world would just be such a beautiful place, because all these feelings belong. Fear, irrational anger, whatever it is, it's okay. And the more we can let it be okay, the more it stops gripping us around the neck, and we start to kind of put it more on a leash and walk with it. And just trying to allow this full human experience to be had and validated and valued. And it's a journey.
Yeah. I mean, maybe what I would say, just to chime in, since we're talking about it, is I have seen over and over and over, it's such a cool moment. The moment someone accepts what is, it changes.
And have you felt that in your own body? Because that's a pretty amazing experience, right? Yeah, I had a back spasm last week from my rib. And I was like, no. And then when I was like, okay, and I started to breathe with it, I was like, wow, watch it move, watch it shift, watch my mind. And that's what we have to give people. Elisha, I know if you and I had the shortcuts, the answers to like how to take people out of pain, I'm like, trust me, when I get a box of magic wands back, you'll be the first one to get one. But until then, what I also know about us both is from our own personal experience and our professional experience, what we do know is how to help people live with and find a softening with the things that are true and painful that they don't prefer. And I think that's a gift that we have. And I wish I had a prettier, sexier, fancier gift. And my own life has transformed from the inside out to allow all of these experiences and to soften, and rather than calcify and resist. And I see you doing the very same thing. And I'm just grateful that we found our way for us, and we now can offer this to other people. And I hope that everyone out there listening, practitioner or client, that you can trust that you have a body that has the capacity and the tolerance. And I like to say, I think my next t-shirt is, you survived 100% of your bad days. And that's a really powerful statistic. And that the work you and I are doing is to help people not just survive, but actually thrive, even when, especially when you're in great suffering, because that is inevitable.
That is the superpower. That is the secret. And I think once you learn it, you know. And then, yeah, we still resist things. We would prefer not to be in pain. We would prefer not to have these things happen. But we have a superpower now because and then you can do it repeatedly. And then you have repeated experiences of, well, when I actually accept this and embrace it and get curious about it, it's not that bad. Like, it's not. It changes. It softens. There's a letting go. So, wonderful. Thank you. In closing, I'm wondering, since you have had 3 decades of working with human beings and guiding them through their suffering, if you had to distill those 30 years of wisdom into three keys, if you will, or 3 pieces of wisdom, what would they be? Mm-hmm.
The same thing I said to clients, I think: curiosity, courage, and willingness. And I find when I or others can channel any of those 3, the aperture opens, light flows in, tolerance expands, joy and satisfaction rises, contentment is in place, and what we're looking for is right there.
Beautiful. And you can bring curiosity, courage, and willingness to anything.
Yeah, your own body, your own experience, other humans. Yeah, if we were all a little more curious and a little more courageous, I can't even imagine. I would love to see that planet.
Yeah, so my version of that, Taylor, is when I teach kinetics, this stepping methodology, is to be a good practitioner and work with people. The only ingredients you need are curiosity, humility, and gumption. So, similar flavor. Yeah. So, well, this is wonderful. Gosh, there are so many, I think, really good nuggets in here. I had no idea what to expect. This was really fun. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for inviting me. And, I just want to say that it's your curiosity that has often been an inspiration to me, of your curiosity about your own body and your own professional life and practice. And we, in this world of social media and all of us being more sort of geographic nomads, we can kind of come and go into and out of each other's lives. But it's been such a treat to have all these opportunities to actually teach a workshop with you and know you personally and lose touch with you and reconnect with you, and to feel the gumption you have to keep going and sharing your own story and offering to humans, both as clients and training professionals, with what you're doing is amazing. And I feel so grateful that there's badass women like you out there doing what you're doing. So thank you.
Oh, well, likewise. Yeah, watching you're kind of like my role model spirit animal around relationships and connection and community.
I love that. I'll be your spirit animal any day.
All right. So if people maybe want to, learn what you're up to, for those listening, Taylor is here in Boulder, Colorado, where I live. We're recording remotely, but we live close to each other. But Taylor's doing some really wonderful things in the world, including retreats that you could potentially go to, even if you don't live here. So Taylor, where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, at humanityshared.com. You can reach me personally. You can find out about all of our offerings, and whether you're a client or a professional, we have all kinds of offerings for you to be your most authentic, exceptional, bright self. And we want to help you and support you on that path. So reach out and find us.
Awesome. We'll put that website in the show notes and below the YouTube video. Thank you very much, Taylor.
Thanks for having me.